The distress beacon had been screaming into the void for 3 days before. Commander Elias Vance finally heard it, his salvage ship. The Wandering Fool drifted through the outer rim of colonized space where few vessels traveled and even fewer returned. This was the territory of dead worlds and forgotten things. And Elias had made his living picking through the bones of civilizations that had risen and fallen long before humanity ever looked up at the stars. Oracle, what do you make of that signal? He asked the ship's artificial intelligence. The response came through the speakers in a calm feminine voice that held no emotion, but somehow always seemed curious. The beacon originates from an uncharted moon, approximately 4 hours from our current position, Commander. The signal does not match any known species or vessel classification in my database. And I find this extremely interesting. Elias leaned back in his pilot chair and rubbed his tired eyes. He was 42 years old, with gray streaking through his dark hair and scars on his hands from decades of salvage work. And he had learned long ago that unknown signals in unknown space usually meant trouble, but trouble also meant opportunity. And his fuel reserves were running low. Set a course, he said. Let's see what we've found. 4 hours later, the Wandering Fool descended through the thin atmosphere of a frozen moon that had no name on any chart. The surface was a wasteland of black ice and jagged rock formations that rose like teeth against the pale light of a distant sun. And Elias felt a strange heaviness in his chest. As the ship touched down, something was wrong here. Or perhaps something was very right. He could not tell which. He suited up and stepped outside into the bitter cold, his breath fogging inside his helmet as he followed the beacon signal across the frozen landscape. The wind howled around him like a living thing, and he walked for nearly an hour before he found the source. What he discovered made him stop and stare in absolute disbelief. It was a dragon. Not the dragons of Earth mythology, with scales and wings and fire-breathing mouths, but something far more ancient and terrifying. The creature before him was made of living plasma and swirling gravitational fields. Its body a storm of golden light that stretched nearly 50 meters across the frozen ground, and even in its broken state, Elias could feel the raw power radiating from it like heat from a dying sun. The Virathi, he realized with shock. The cosmic dragons that every spacefaring species spoke of in whispers and legends. The galaxy believed them extinct for 10,000 years, Oracle. Elias breathed into his communicator. Are you seeing this? I am, Commander, the AI replied. And for the first time in all their years together, Elias heard something like wonder in her voice. This should not be possible. The Virathi were declared extinct by the Galactic Council millennia ago. The creature stirred at the sound of their voices, and Elias saw that it was wounded. Great tears in its plasma body leaked golden light onto the black ice, and its gravitational field flickered and sputtered like a candle in the wind. Something had hurt this being badly, and it was dying. Elias should have run. Any sane person would have fled from such a creature, especially one in its death throes, because a dying god could destroy a world in its final moments. But Elias Vance had never been particularly sane. He walked toward the Virathi instead, his boots crunching on the frozen ground, and when he reached its side, he did something that no alien species in the history of the galaxy had ever done. He knelt down and placed his hand against its flickering form. The heat should have killed him instantly, but it did not. Instead, a warmth spread through his glove and up his arm, and he heard a voice in his mind that was not a voice at all, but something older and deeper than language. You do not flee, the Virathi said, and Elias felt its surprise and confusion. Why do you not flee, little creature? Because you're dying, Elias said simply, and no one should die alone. The Virathi was silent for a long moment, and Elias felt it examining him with senses he could not comprehend. It looked through his memories and his dreams and his fears, and it saw the man he had been and the man he had tried to become I am called Sorvith." It finally said, "I have lived for 17,000 years. And in all that time, no creature has ever shown me kindness without expectation. The others came to worship or to steal or to destroy, but you came simply to comfort. What happened to you?" Elias asked the Dominion Collective. Sorvith replied, and Elias felt the creature's ancient anger and sorrow. "They hunt my kind to harvest our essence. They wish to build a weapon that will let them conquer the galaxy. And I am the last of my people who refused to hide." Elias felt tears forming in his eyes, though he did not know why. Perhaps it was the tragedy of such a magnificent being brought low by greed and violence. Or perhaps it was simply that he had always been too soft for this harsh universe. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. "You already have," Sorvith said. "You have reminded me that the cosmos still holds wonder. In 17,000 years, I never bonded with another being, never shared my fire with anyone, because I believed all other creatures were too small and too brief to matter." The Virathi's light began to fade, and Elias felt its life slipping away like sand through his fingers. "But I was wrong." Sorvith continued, "Your kind are small and brief, but you burn so brightly in your short time. You love without reason and hope without cause, and show compassion to dying strangers on frozen moons." "Sorvith, please," Elias whispered. "There must be something." "There is," the Virathi said. And suddenly, Elias felt the creature's consciousness wrap around his own like a warm embrace. "I give you my fire, Elias Vance. Not as a weapon, but as a gift. Carry it forward and show the galaxy what humanity can become." Light exploded around them, and Elias screamed as 17,000 years of cosmic power poured into his fragile human body. It was agony and ecstasy and everything in between, and when it finally ended, he collapsed onto the black ice beside the empty space where Sorvith had been. The Virathi was gone. Elias lay there for a long time, his breath coming in ragged gasps and his heart pounding against his ribs. When he finally opened his eyes and looked up at the sky, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Stars burned behind his vision, and he could feel the gravitational pull of moons he had never visited. Everything had changed. "Commander," Oracle's voice crackled through his communicator with evident concern. "Your biosigns are displaying anomalies I cannot explain. What happened out there?" Elias slowly climbed to his feet and looked down at his hands. Golden light flickered beneath his skin like embers waiting to catch fire. "I don't know," he whispered, "but I think I'm not entirely human anymore." The wind howled around him as he walked back to his ship. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Dominion Collective was already turning its attention toward a new target. The hunt had begun. 3 weeks after the frozen moon, Elias Vance walked through the crowded corridors of Helix Station and tried to pretend that everything was normal. It was not. His body temperature now ran at a constant 39 degrees, high enough to concern any doctor, but not quite high enough to kill him. Electromagnetic fields distorted whenever he passed by sensitive equipment, causing screens to flicker and communication devices to screech with static. Worst of all, he could see things now that no human should be able to perceive. He saw radiation, spectrums dancing in the air like colorful ribbons, and he heard the whisper of solar winds across distances that should have been impossible. When he closed his eyes, he felt the gravitational pull of every object around him. From the station itself to the ships docked in its base to the 3 moons orbiting the gas giant beyond the viewport. "You look terrible," said Mira Chun as she fell into step beside him. Myra was his chief engineer, a small woman with sharp eyes and quick hands who had served aboard the Wandering Fool for nearly 8 years. She was the closest thing Elias had to family, and she was the only person he had told about what happened on that moon. "I feel terrible," Elias admitted. "The power inside me keeps growing, and I don't know how to control it. Last night I had a nightmare and accidentally melted through the wall of my quarters. Myra winced in sympathy. Oracle has been running simulations based on the data from your bioscanners. She thinks your body is still adapting to the Virathi essence, and that the instability should decrease over time. Should, Elias repeated with a bitter laugh. That's a comforting word. They turned a corner and nearly collided with a group of Thrall merchants. Tall insectoid beings with compound eyes and clicking mandibles. The merchants took one look at Elias and immediately backed away, their antennae twitching with what might have been fear or disgust, or both. Word was spreading. It had been impossible to keep the encounter secret. Too many sensors had detected the energy burst on that frozen moon, and too many questions had been asked when Elias returned with golden light flickering in his eyes. The galactic community had taken notice, and not everyone was happy about what they had learned. The Dominion Collective had already declared him a containment priority, which was their polite way of saying they wanted him captured or killed. The Ascended Conclave, an ancient order of alien scholars who considered themselves the keepers of galactic knowledge, had sent formal requests demanding that he surrender himself for study and preservation. To them, a human hosting Virathi power was an aberration that could not be allowed to exist. Humanity was considered a young species, barely 1,000 years into spaceflight, and notable only for their stubbornness and odd sentimentality. The idea that such a primitive being could contain the essence of a cosmic dragon was offensive to species that have been traveling the stars for millions of years. We need to leave, Mira said quietly as they entered the docking bay where the wandering fool waited. I've heard rumors that Conclave agents are already on the station, and the Dominion has ships patrolling nearby systems. Elias nodded grimly and climbed the ramp into his ship, where Oracle's sensors immediately began scanning him. Commander, the AI said, I have completed my analysis of your condition. The Virathi essence has bonded with your cellular structure at a fundamental level, and I do not believe it can be removed without killing you. However, I have also discovered something interesting. What's that? Elias asked. The essence appears to respond to your emotional state, Oracle explained. When you experience strong feelings, the power fluctuates dramatically. I believe this is why you struggle to control it. The Virathi regulated their abilities through millennia of instinct and emotional detachment. But humans are creatures of passion and intensity. Elias sat down heavily in his pilot chair and stared at his hands, where golden light still pulsed beneath his skin. So my own emotions are working against me? Not necessarily, Oracle replied. I believe your emotions could become your greatest asset if you learn to channel them properly. The Virathi were powerful but cold. They observed the universe without truly feeling it. You are different, Commander. You feel everything, and that could make you stronger than any Virathi who ever lived. Before Elias could respond, the ship's sensors blared a warning. Multiple vessels approaching, Oracle announced. I am detecting Conclave scout ships and Dominion interceptors. They have surrounded the station. Myra rushed to her engineering station while Elias began the startup sequence for the engines. They had maybe 10 minutes before the enemy ships were in weapons range. And the wandering fool was a salvage vessel. Not a warship. We can't outfight them, Myra said. Then we outrun them, Elias replied. Oracle, plot a course through the asteroid field on the far side of the station. It's dangerous, but their larger ships won't be able to follow. The AI complied, and moments later, the wandering fool launched from the docking bay at full burn. Warning shots streaked past the viewport as the enemy vessels opened fire, and Elias threw the ship into a series of evasive maneuvers that pushed the engines to their limits. This is High Scholar Vathus of the Ascended Conclave. A cold voice crackled over the communication channel. You are harboring a dangerous anomaly that threatens galactic stability. Surrender the human Elias Vance immediately, or we will be forced to take more aggressive action. Elias ignored the transmission and dove into the asteroid field. weaving between massive chunks of rock and ice with skill born from decades of salvage work. Behind him, the smaller Conclave scouts tried to follow but quickly fell back as the asteroids grew denser and more dangerous. They're breaking off pursuit, Mira reported with relief, but Elias knew this was only the beginning. The Conclave and the Dominion would not stop hunting him, and eventually they would catch up. He needed to learn how to control the power inside him before that happened, or he would become exactly what they feared over the following weeks. He practiced whenever he could. He learned to feel the gravitational fields around him and push against them with his mind. He discovered that intense concentration could summon plasma fire to his fingertips, though controlling where it went was still a challenge. He began to sense the presence of other beings through their electromagnetic signatures. Like a sixth sense that grew stronger every day, it was exhausting and painful work. And more than once, he nearly killed himself or damaged the ship, but slowly and possibly. He began to improve. "You're not becoming a Virathi," Oracle observed one night after a particularly successful training session. "Your control methods are completely different from anything in the historical records. The Virathi suppress their emotions to maintain stability, but you are using your emotions as fuel. You have created something entirely new." "Commander," Elias wiped sweat from his brow and smiled despite his exhaustion. "Good. I never wanted to stop being human anyway." Somewhere in the darkness of space, enemy ships continued their search, and the net around him grew tighter with each passing day, but Elias was no longer afraid whatever came next. He would face it as himself, a human with the fire of a dragon burning in his heart, and humanity had never been very good at giving up. The pale fleet emerged from hyperspace like ghosts rising from a grave, and Elias felt a cold dread settle into his bones as he watched them through the viewport. There were 7 ships in total, each one a massive warship bristling with weapons and armored in pale white metal that gave the fleet its name. These were not ordinary military vessels, but the personal strike force of High Prelate Vorun. The most feared commander in the Dominion Collective Oracle displayed the incoming transmission on screen, and Elias found himself staring at a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. Vorun was a Kethrani, a species of tall, gray-skinned beings with 4 arms and eyes that glowed with cold intelligence. He had spent 3 centuries hunting the last Virathi across the galaxy, and now he had found a new target. "Human," Vorun said, his voice like the grinding of gears. "I am told you carry the essence of the creature called Sorvith. I hunted that beast for 40 years before it escaped me on that frozen moon, and I did not appreciate having my prey stolen by a lesser species." Elias leaned forward in his chair. "I didn't steal anything. Sorvith gave me his power freely because I showed him kindness, something your kind clearly knows nothing about." Vorun's eyes narrowed with contempt. "You speak of kindness as if it were a virtue. It is weakness, nothing more. The Virathi were the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and yet they fell because they could not set aside their solitary nature and unite against their enemies. You will fall for the same reason, human. Sentiment makes you vulnerable." "Maybe," Elias admitted. "But I'd rather be vulnerable and kind than powerful and cruel." The transmission cut off, and the pale fleet began its approach. What followed was the most terrifying chase of Elias's life. The wandering fool was fast for a salvage ship, but it was no match for Dominion warships designed for pursuit and destruction. Elias fled through neutral systems and crowded shipping lanes, using every trick he had learned in decades of salvage work to stay one step ahead of his hunters. But Vorun was patient and relentless, and his fleet seemed to be everywhere at once on the mining colony of Thresh 4. Elias barely escaped an ambush that destroyed the station's entire eastern dock. Dozens of innocent workers died in the crossfire, and Elias carried their faces in his nightmares for weeks afterward on the trade hub of Nexus Prime. Dominion agents nearly captured Mira while she was buying supplies. Elias had to use his powers in public for the first time to save her, and the resulting explosion of plasma fire left a crater in the marketplace that took months to repair. With each encounter, word spread further across the galaxy. Other species began to watch the chase with growing interest. Here was a single human, a member of a young and unremarkable species, somehow evading the most powerful military force in known space. It should have been impossible, and yet Elias continued to survive. The Conclave scholars are debating your existence, Oracle reported one evening as they hid in the shadow of a gas giant. Some believe you should be destroyed before you become a threat. Others argue that you represent a unique opportunity to study the interaction between Virathi essence and organic biology. How comforting, Elias muttered. However, the AI continued, there is a third faction that has emerged with a more interesting theory. They believe that humans may be uniquely compatible with Virathi essence because of your species' unusual emotional nature. Elias frowned. What do you mean? The Virathi were creatures of immense power but limited emotional range, Oracle explained. They experienced the universe through pure logic and instinct, without the passionate intensity that characterizes human consciousness. Some scholars now believe that this emotional coldness was actually a weakness that prevented them from reaching their full potential. And they think humans are different? Yes, humans are creatures of contradiction, Commander. You are fragile, yet enduring, violent, yet compassionate, mortal, yet defiant of death. These contradictions create an emotional intensity that no other species possesses. And some believe this intensity could actually amplify Virathi power rather than destabilize it. Elias considered this in silence. He had always viewed his emotions as obstacles to overcome in his training. But what if Oracle was right? What if his humanity was not a weakness, but a strength? Before he could explore this thought further, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Dominion ships incoming. Myra called from her station. They found us again. But this time, something was different. Instead of the usual pursuit formation, the Pale Fleet had arranged itself in a containment pattern that cut off all escape routes. They had finally cornered their prey. Varun's face appeared on the view screen once more, and this time he was smiling. Did you really think you could run forever, human? I have spent centuries hunting creatures far more powerful than you. Your chase ends here. We can still fight, Myra said, but her voice trembled with uncertainty. Elias shook his head. Even with his growing powers, he could not take on 7 warships at once. They were trapped. I do not wish to destroy you unnecessarily, Varun continued. The essence you carry is valuable, and I would prefer to extract it intact. Surrender peacefully, and I will grant your companions a quick death. Resist, and I will make them suffer in ways you cannot imagine. Don't listen to him, Myra urged. We can find another way. But then Varun played his final card. To ensure your cooperation, he said, I have taken the liberty of acquiring some additional leverage. The view screen shifted to show a holding cell aboard the Dominion flagship, and Elias felt his heart stop as he recognized the prisoner inside. It was Kethra, the alien defector who had been feeding them intelligence about Dominion movements for the past month. She had been captured, and now she hung from chains with blood dripping from wounds across her scaled body. Come alone to my flagship within 6 hours, Varun said. If you do not, I will execute this traitor slowly and broadcast her screams across every communication channel in the sector. And then I will come for the engineer as well. The transmission ended, and Elias sat in stunned silence. Myra grabbed his arm. You can't go. It's obviously a trap. I know, Elias said quietly. Then don't go. Catherine knew the risks when she agreed to help us. She wouldn't want you to sacrifice yourself for her. Elias turned to look at Myra. and she saw something in his eyes that frightened her, not anger or fear, but a terrible calm that seemed to burn with golden light. "She showed me kindness," he said, "just like Sorvith did. I won't let her die alone while I hide in the shadows." He stood and walked toward the airlock where a small shuttle waited. "Elias, please," Mira cried. He paused at the doorway and looked back at her with a sad smile. "Oracle, if I don't make it back, get Mira somewhere safe." "That's my final order." "Understood." "Commander," the AI replied, and for the first time, Elias thought he heard grief in her synthetic voice. Then he stepped into the shuttle and flew toward the waiting fleet. Ready to face whatever came next, the trap was set. And he walked into it willingly, but Varun had made one critical mistake in all his centuries of hunting. He had never hunted a human before, and he did not understand what that truly meant. Humans did not give up, and when they had nothing left to lose, they became the most dangerous creatures in the universe. The Dominion flagship was called the Eternal Silence, and Elias thought the name was appropriate as he walked through its cold. White Carter's armed guards surrounded him on all sides, their weapons trained on his back with nervous fingers hovering over triggers. They had heard the stories about what this human could do, and none of them wanted to be the first to discover if those stories were true. High Prelate Varun waited in the command center, standing before a massive viewport that looked out upon the stars. He turned as Elias was brought before him, and his stone-carved face twisted into something that might have been satisfaction. "The great human anomaly," Varun said. "I expected something more impressive. You look tired, weak, barely able to stand. Is this truly the being that has evaded my fleet for so long?" Elias did not respond. He simply stood there with his hands bound behind his back and his eyes fixed on the floor. No defiant speeches? Varun mocked. No declarations of human superiority. How disappointing. "I was told your species had a talent for meaningless chatter. Where is Kethra?" Elias asked quietly. Varun gestured, and guards dragged the wounded alien defector into the room. She was barely conscious, her scales cracked and bleeding from days of torture, but her eyes widened when she saw Elias. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "You fool. You stupid, wonderful fool. I couldn't let you die alone." Elias Sadvoroan laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. Such sentiment. "This is why your species will never amount to anything. You allow your emotions to override your logic, and it makes you predictable. I knew you would come the moment I captured this traitor. Your kind cannot help but sacrifice themselves for those you care about." He gestured to his technicians, who began preparing a complex array of extraction equipment. The process of removing Virathy essence is unpleasant, but not necessarily fatal. If you cooperate fully, you might survive with your mind intact. Resist, and I will tear the power from you piece by piece while you scream. Elias raised his head and looked at Varun with eyes that had begun to glow faintly gold. "Can I ask you something first?" "Speak. In 3 centuries of hunting the Virathy, did you ever stop to wonder why they let themselves be hunted? They were the most powerful beings in the galaxy. They could have destroyed your ships with a thought, burned your worlds to ash, erased your entire species from existence. But they didn't. Why do you think that was?" Varun's eyes narrowed. "Because they were arrogant. They believed themselves above such petty conflicts and refused to fight until it was too late." "No," Elias said, and his voice was calm in a way that made the guards shift nervously. "It's because they didn't care enough to fight. The Virathy were powerful but empty. They drifted through the cosmos for millions of years without ever truly connecting with anything or anyone. They had no friends to protect, no loved ones to defend, no causes worth dying for. Their fire was pure, but it was cold. Golden light began to seep through Elias's skin, and the temperature in the room rose sharply. "What are you doing?" Varun demanded, his composure cracking for the first time. "Guards," increase the suppression field. But Elias was no longer listening. During his journey to the flagship, he had finally understood what Sorvith had tried to show him in those final moments on the frozen moon. The Virathi controlled their power through detachment and instinct, keeping their emotions carefully contained. But Elias was human, and humans were not built for detachment. They were built for passion and fury, and love and grief. They were creatures of fire, not ice. He had been trying to master the Virathi essence by suppressing his humanity. But that was exactly backward. The power did not need to be controlled. It needed to be felt. Elias closed his eyes and let himself remember everything. The fear he had felt watching Sorvith die. The love he held for Mira and his crew. The grief of all the lives lost in Varun's pursuit. The righteous anger at 3 centuries of cruelty and destruction. He let himself feel it all. And the Virathi essence inside him responded like a sleeping giant finally awakened. "Stop him!" Varun screamed. "Kill him now!" Guards opened fire, but the energy bolts evaporated before they could reach Elias's skin. The air around him had become too hot, the gravitational field too distorted. He was becoming something beyond their weapons, beyond their understanding. Elias opened his eyes, and they blazed with the light of dying suns. "Kethra, show me kindness," he said, and his voice resonated with power that shook the walls. "Myra stood by me when she could have run. Oracle guided me when I was lost. Sorvith gave me everything he had because I held him while he died." He stepped forward, and the deck plating melted beneath his feet. "You asked what I am," Elias continued. "I'm human. We're small and brief and fragile, but we love harder than any species in the galaxy. We hope when there's no reason to hope. We fight when we should surrender. We hold dying strangers and weep for their passing." The suppression field generators exploded in showers of sparks, unable to contain the energy pouring from Elias's body. "That's not weakness," he said. "That's our greatest strength for 3 blazing seconds." Elias became a starlight, and heat and gravitational force erupted from his body in a controlled wave that swept through the command center and beyond. It was not destruction he unleashed, but transformation. His human will shaping the Virathi power into something precise and purposeful. Every weapon system on the Eternal Silence melted into slag. Every engine failed. Every communication array went dark. The guards collapsed unconscious, overwhelmed by the radiation but not killed when it ended. Elias stood alone in the ruined command center with Varun kneeling before him. The High Prelate's forearms trembled, and his cold eyes were wide with an emotion he had not felt in 300 years. "Fear, what are you?" he whispered. Elias walked past him and gently lifted Kethra in his arms. She was unconscious but breathing, and he could feel her life force stabilizing as his power flowed into her wounds. "I already told you," Elias said without looking back. "I'm human. We don't know when to quit." He carried Kethra toward the hangar bay, stepping over unconscious soldiers and through melted doorways. Behind him, Varun remained kneeling on the deck. Too stunned to move or speak, the pale fleet was crippled, its flagship dead in space and its other vessels damaged by the energy wave that had rippled outward from the Eternal Silence. None of them moved to stop the small shuttle that emerged from the hangar and flew toward the Wandering Fool when Elias docked with his ship. Mira was waiting at the airlock with tears streaming down her face. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed as she embraced him. "When I saw the energy burst, I thought, I'm okay," Elias said gently. "I finally figured it out. The power doesn't want to control me. It wants to be part of me. And being human isn't a weakness. It's the reason Sorvith chose me in the first place." He looked down at Kethra, who was beginning to stir in his arms. "Let's get her to medical. She's going to be okay, but she needs rest." Behind them, through the viewport, the pale fleet drifted helplessly in the void. The hunter had become the hunted, and the galaxy would never be the same. Word traveled faster than light in the age of galactic communication, and within days, every inhabited world in known space had heard the story a human had bonded with a Virathi and lived. He had faced the Pale Fleet alone and crippled it without taking a single life. He had shown mercy to enemies who deserved none and compassion to those who had been abandoned by everyone else. The Dominion Collective fractured within weeks as member species began questioning the leadership that had led them to such a humiliating defeat. High Prelate Varun was stripped of his command and imprisoned for his failures. Though Aurelius heard rumors that the old hunter spent his days staring at walls and muttering about golden fire, the Ascended Conclave sent emissaries to the Wandering Fool, but not to demand Elias surrender himself for study. Instead, they came with gifts and requests for conversation. Eager to learn from a being who had achieved what their greatest scholars had declared impossible, they want to understand how you merged with the Virithi essence, Oracle reported after one such meeting. Their records indicate that 17 other species attempted similar bonds over the past 10,000 years, and all of them died. You are the only successful case in recorded history. Elias shook his head. I didn't do anything special. I just refused to let Sorvith die alone, and he decided to share his gift with me. There was no grand plan or secret technique. That is precisely what fascinates them, Oracle replied. You succeeded through instinct and emotion rather than calculation and preparation. It contradicts everything they believed about the nature of Virathi power. Mira laughed from her engineering station. Leave it to humans to stumble into cosmic significance through sheer stubbornness and empathy. Cathra, now fully recovered from her wounds, smiled at this comment. She had chosen to remain with the crew rather than return to her own people, claiming that she had found a new family worth staying with. Where will you go now? She asked Elias. You could have anything you wanted. The Conclave would give you a seat on their council. The human colonies would make you their greatest hero. There are probably a dozen species ready to offer you their allegiance. Elias looked out the viewport at the stars that now felt less like distant lights and more like old friends. I want to go back, he said quietly, to the frozen moon where Sorvith died. I want to build something there, a beacon that transmits a message in every known language. What message? Mira asked. You are not alone, Elias replied. Even here, even now, you are not alone. That's what Sorvith taught me in his final moments. That's what I want to share with the galaxy. They made the journey together, the small crew of misfits and outcasts who had somehow changed the course of galactic history. The frozen moon was exactly as Elias remembered it. A wasteland of black ice and jagged rocks under a pale distant sun. He walked to the place where Sorvith had died and stood in silence for a long moment, feeling the absence where a cosmic presence had once burned. Then he raised his hands and let the Virathi power flow through him. Golden light erupted from his palms and spiraled upward into the sky, forming a structure that was part beacon and part monument. It rose hundreds of meters above the frozen surface, a pillar of crystallized plasma that would shine across the void for centuries to come. When it was complete, Oracle activated the transmission array, and Elias's message began broadcasting in every language known to galactic civilization. You are not alone. Even here, even now. For weeks, nothing happened. Elias and his crew remained on the moon, waiting and hoping and wondering if anyone would hear. Then, on the 32nd day, they came. A point of light appeared in the sky, then another, then a dozen more. They descended through the thin atmosphere like falling stars, and as they drew closer, Elias recognized what they were: Virathi, not one or two survivors, but hundreds of them. Beings of living plasma and gravitational force who had hidden in the dark spaces between stars for 10,000 years. They had waited through millennia of persecution and fear, believing that the galaxy would never be ready for them again. But they had heard Elias's beacon. and they had decided to hope. The largest of them descended to hover before Elias, its form shifting and swirling with colors that had no names in any human language. When it spoke, Elias felt the voice in his mind, just as he had felt Sorvith's final words. "We are the last of our kind," the Virathi said. "For 10,000 years, we have hidden from those who would destroy us. We watched your species emerge from your small blue world and spread across the stars. And we wondered if you would become another enemy. We don't have to be enemies," Elias said. "Sorvith showed me that different beings can share their fire without diminishing each other. There's enough warmth in the universe for everyone." Sorvith was our youngest. The Virathi replied. He was always the most curious about other species, the most willing to believe that connection was possible. We thought his openness was a weakness that would destroy him. It wasn't weakness, Elias said. His willingness to reach out saved him in the end. He didn't die alone and forgotten. He died sharing his gift with someone who would carry it forward. The great Virathi was silent for a long moment, its plasma form flickering with emotions that Elias could not quite interpret. Then it did something that no Virathi had done in recorded history. It bowed. "We have lived for millions of years," it said. "We have witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations, and we believed we understood the universe. But we missed something important. We missed the fire that burns in beings like you." Other Virathi descended to join the first, surrounding Elias and his crew in a constellation of living light. "Your species is young and fragile," the Virathi continued. "You burn for such a short time compared to us. But in that brief burning, you achieve something we never could. You love without holding back, hope without reason, show compassion to dying strangers. Your fire is not cold like ours. It is warm, and it illuminates everything it touches." Elias felt tears forming in his eyes. "We're not perfect. Humans have done terrible things throughout our history. We've hurt each other and destroyed worlds and made countless mistakes." "Yes," the Virathi agreed, "but you have also built monuments to fallen friends and sung songs for those you have lost. You have crossed the void to hold the hands of strangers and spoken words of comfort to those who had no one else. These things matter, Elias Vance. These things are what the universe needs." The beacon behind Elias pulsed with golden light, and its message continued broadcasting into the endless dark. "You are not alone." Even here, even now, in the months that followed, everything changed. The Virathi emerged from hiding and began rebuilding their connections with the galactic community. But they did not seek to dominate or conquer. Instead, they offered knowledge and protection to those who asked, guided by a new understanding of what true power meant, and everywhere they went, they told stories about the human who had taught them how to feel again. Humanity would never be seen as young or unremarkable after that. Other species looked at them with new eyes, wondering what other miracles might emerge from a people who loved so fiercely and hoped so stubbornly. Elias returned to the stars with his crew, not as a hero or a leader, but as what he had always been, a salvage operator with a soft heart and a stubborn streak, doing his best to leave the universe a little better than he found it somewhere in his chest. Alongside his steady human heartbeat, an ancient ember burned. It was patient and warm and no longer alone. And that, Elias thought as he watched the stars wheel past his viewport, was the greatest gift of all, not power or fame or eternal life, but connection. The knowledge that even in the vast cold emptiness of space, there were others who cared. He smiled and set a course for the next adventure, carrying Sorvith's fire forward into a future that was brighter than anyone had dared to imagine. The story was only beginning.